The mining drill made a grinding sound that told Lee Taeho something was wrong. He wiped sweat from his face and crawled deeper into the tunnel beneath the Veltar mining colony. The crystalline walls around him glowed with a soft blue light that came from minerals buried in the rock for millions of years. Taeho had been fixing machines for 12 years on this distant planet. He knew every sound the equipment made. This grinding noise was new and it worried him. The drill bit had hit something that was not rock or crystal. Something metallic. He turned off the drill and pulled out his scanner. The device beeped and showed readings he had never seen before. There was a large hollow space behind the wall. Something big was buried in the crystal cave system that ran deep under the colony. Taeho grabbed his plasma cutter from his tool bag. The blue beam sliced through the crystal wall like butter. Steam rose from the cut edges as the superheated rock cooled in the cave air. After 10 minutes of careful cutting, he had made an opening big enough to crawl through. The scanner in his hand beeped faster as he moved through the hole. Emergency lights on his helmet showed a tunnel that stretched away into darkness. The walls here were different. They looked smooth and organic, like they had been grown instead of carved. Strange. Symbols covered the surfaces and they pulsed with a faint red light. Taeho had worked on many types of alien technology during his years in space. But this was unlike anything in the galactic database. The tunnel curved downward and opened into a massive cavern. His helmet light swept across something that made him stop breathing for a moment. A ship sat in the center of the cavern, but calling it a ship was not quite right. It looked like it had been grown from some kind of living metal. Curved surfaces flowed into each other without seams or joints. Sections that might have been engines or weapons sprouted from the hull like branches on a tree. The ship was badly damaged. Huge cracks ran along its surface and pieces of the hull had broken away to show the interior. A strange smell filled the air. It was sharp and metallic but also had something organic about it, like the smell of a forest after rain. Taeho approached the ship carefully. His scanner was going crazy with readings he could not understand. Energy signatures that should not exist. Biological patterns mixed with mechanical systems. Whatever built this ship had technology far beyond anything humans or other known species possessed. An opening in the side of the ship looked like it might have been a door. The edges were twisted and bent from some kind of impact. Taeho squeezed through the gap and found himself in a corridor that curved away in both directions. The walls glowed with the same red light he had seen in the tunnel. His boots made soft sounds on a floor that felt warm and slightly soft under his feet. Emergency lighting came from strips that ran along the walls. But the light was fading. Whatever powered this ship was running out of energy. The first body he found was in what looked like a control room. The creature was unlike anything Taeho had ever seen. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, even lying on its side. Its body was covered in scales that changed color from deep green to bronze as his light moved across them. Forearms ended in hands that had long fingers with claws. The head was elongated like a dragon from old Earth stories. The creature was clearly dead, but its body was still warm. Taeho found 2 more bodies in other parts of the ship. All of them were the same dragon-like species. All of them had died recently from injuries that looked like they came from a crash landing. It was when he was examining the ship's biomechanical systems that he heard the sound. A soft chirping noise that seemed to come from deeper in the ship. Taeho followed, the sound through corridors that grew smaller and more damaged as he went. The sound led him to a small chamber filled with strange equipment. Biopods lined the walls like giant eggs made of the same living metal as the ship. Most of them were dark and cold, but one pod in the corner still glowed with faint energy. Inside the pod was something that made Taeho's breath catch in his throat. A baby dragon no bigger than a house cat. But this one was different from the adults he had found. Instead of green and bronze scales, this baby was pure white. Its scales looked like fresh snow under his helmet lights. Its eyes were open, and they were the color of blue crystals. The baby dragon looked at him with intelligence that seemed impossible for something so young. It made soft chirping sounds and moved its tiny claws against the inside of the pod. The life support system was failing. Red warning lights blinked on the pod's surface and the temperature was dropping. Taeho looked around the chamber. The adult dragons he had found earlier were too badly injured to have cared for this baby. Maybe they had tried to save it before they died. Or maybe they had abandoned it. He remembered stories from the galactic database about some species that rejected offspring that looked different. The baby dragon made another chirping sound. This time it sounded weaker. The pod's energy levels were dropping fast. In a few hours, the life support would fail completely and the baby would die. Tae-ho had always been good at fixing things. Broken machines were problems that had solutions. This baby dragon was just another problem that needed fixing. He carefully opened the pod and lifted the tiny creature in his hands. The baby dragon was warm and it weighed almost nothing. It looked up at him with those crystal blue eyes and made a soft sound that seemed almost like a purr. Its white scales were soft under his fingers like fine silk. Tae-ho made a decision that would change his life and the lives of everyone in the galaxy. He wrapped the baby dragon in his work jacket and carried it back through the ship toward the Yao tunnel entrance. He would take it back to his workshop on the mining station. He would figure out what it needed to survive. Behind him, the alien ship's lights continued to fade as its power systems failed. The bodies of the adult dragons grew, cold in the darkness, but in his arms the baby dragon was alive and warm and depending on him to keep it that way. The walk back to the surface seemed longer than usual. The baby dragon slept in his jacket, making tiny breathing sounds that reminded him of a sleeping kitten. Tae-ho climbed up through the crystal tunnels toward his workshop above, knowing that everything had just changed but not understanding how much. 3 weeks had passed since Lee Tae-ho brought the baby dragon to his workshop. He had not slept properly since that day. Every few hours he checked on the small white creature that now lived in a makeshift habitat built from spare parts and fusion cells. Tae-ho had named the dragon Hyeon, which meant white in his native Korean language. The name seemed to fit the tiny creature with scales that gleamed like fresh snow under the workshop lights. Hyeon had grown noticeably in just 3 weeks. He was now the size of a small dog instead of a kitten. The workshop that had once been organized and clean was now filled with experimental equipment. Tae-ho had built an enclosure using transparent aluminum panels salvaged from old ship windows. Inside the enclosure, he had created different temperature zones using heating elements and cooling units. The humidity was controlled by a system he had built from water recyclers and atmospheric processors. Feeding Hyeon had been the biggest challenge. Tae-ho had gone back to the crashed ship several times to collect samples of what looked like food storage containers. Using the mining colony's small laboratory, he had analyzed the contents and discovered a complex mixture of proteins and minerals that seemed designed for growing dragons. The food synthesizer in his workshop now produced a paste that was close to the original formula. Hyeon seemed to enjoy the food and ate with an appetite that amazed Tae-ho. The baby dragon would chirp happily when feeding time arrived and would follow the food bowl with his bright blue eyes. Park Ji-woo, the colony administrator, had visited the workshop twice in the past week. The first time he had been skeptical about keeping an unknown alien creature on the station. But when he saw how docile and intelligent Hyeon appeared to be, he had given permission for the experiment to continue. The second visit had been different. Park had brought Dr. Kim Sora, the station's xenobiologist, with him. Dr. Kim was a serious woman who usually worked with plant samples and mineral formations, but she had become fascinated with Hyeon from the moment she saw him. Dr. Kim had run several non-invasive scans on the baby dragon. The results had surprised everyone. Hyeon's brain showed activity patterns that were far more complex than expected for such a young creature. His nervous system had structures that did not exist in any known species. Most interesting of all, his body seemed to generate small electromagnetic fields that changed based on his emotional state. Tae-ho had noticed this effect himself. When Hyeon was happy, the metal tools in the workshop would sometimes move slightly, or electronic displays would flicker. When the baby dragon was scared or upset, the workshop's main computer would occasionally malfunction until Hyeon calmed down. The strangest thing was how Hyeon seemed to understand human emotions. When Tae-ho was tired from working long hours, the baby dragon would make soft purring sounds and settle close to him. When Tae-ho was frustrated with a difficult repair job, Hyeon would bring him small objects like screws or circuit boards as if trying to help. It was during the 4th week that everything changed. Tae-ho was working on a damaged mining robot when alarms began sounding throughout the colony. He looked up from his work to see Haiyan standing alert in his enclosure. The baby dragon's eyes were focused on the ceiling as if he could see through. The metal walls of the workshop, the colony's communication system crackled to life. The voice of the duty officer filled the workshop with urgent words. 3 large ships had appeared at the edge of the star system. The ships were of unknown design, and they were heading directly for the mining colony. Tai-Ho felt his stomach drop as he realized what this probably meant. He looked at Haiyan, who was now making soft whimpering sounds. The baby dragon seemed to sense that something important was happening. Within 6 hours, the alien ships had arrived at the colony. They were massive vessels that dwarfed the human mining platforms. The ships had the same organic flowing design as the crashed vessel Tai-Ho had found in the caverns. But these ships were intact and clearly functional. The leader of the alien delegation was a dragon who stood nearly 4 meters tall. Her scales were bronze-colored with patterns of silver that seemed to shift as she moved. She identified herself as Velthera and explained that her people were called the Rythek. Velthera and her team had come to the mining colony to search for survivors from a ship that had crashed in this system several weeks ago. They wanted to recover any crew members who might still be alive and to retrieve important cargo that the ship had been carrying. Cho Min-sik, the colony's diplomatic officer, led the negotiations with the Rythek delegation. Tai-Ho watched the proceedings from his workshop through the colony's internal monitors. He kept Haiyan hidden in a storage room behind the main workshop area. The Rythek were polite but clearly determined to search the entire colony if necessary. They explained that their people took the recovery of their dead very seriously. They also mentioned that the crashed ship had been carrying some items that were culturally important to their species. During the second day of negotiations, Tai-Ho overheard a conversation between 2 of the Rythek guards. They were speaking in their own language, but the colony's translation system was working to convert their words. What Tai-Ho heard made his blood run cold. The guards were talking about albino dragons. They used words that the translator converted as cursed and abomination. One of the guards mentioned that if any albino offspring had survived the crash, they should be destroyed immediately to prevent future problems. That night, Tai-Ho sat in his workshop looking at Haiyan, who was sleeping peacefully in his enclosure. The baby dragon looked so innocent and harmless. His white scales rose and fell with each breath, and his tiny claws were curled up like a sleeping cat. Tai-Ho made a decision that would put him in direct conflict with the powerful alien visitors. He would not tell the Rythek about Haiyan. He would keep the baby dragon hidden no matter what the consequences might be. The next morning brought new challenges. Velthara announced that her people would need to conduct a thorough search of the colony, including all private workshops and storage areas. The search would begin in 2 days and would continue until they had examined every part of the mining station. Tai-Ho looked at Haiyan, who seemed to sense the tension in the air. The baby dragon's blue eyes were bright with intelligence and trust. He depended on Tai-Ho for everything: food protection and safety. The mechanic knew he could not betray that trust no matter what happened. The countdown to the search had begun. Tai-Ho had less than 48 hours to figure out how to keep Haiyan safe from his own people. 2 months had passed since the Rythek delegation arrived at the mining colony. Lee Tai-Ho had managed to keep Haiyan hidden during their initial search by moving the baby dragon to unused maintenance tunnels deep in the station. The Rythek had found the crashed ship and recovered the bodies of their fallen crew members, but they had not found what they were really looking for. Haiyan had grown much larger during these months of hiding. He was now the size of a large dog, and his intelligence had developed in ways that amazed both Tai-Ho and Dr. Kim So-ra. The young dragon could understand complex instructions and seemed to have an intuitive grasp of how electronic systems worked. Dr. Kim had been conducting secret studies of Haiyan's abilities whenever the Rythek were away from that section of the station. Her findings were remarkable. Haiyan could interface directly with computer systems by touching them with his claws. He could manipulate small gravitational fields to move objects without touching them. Most impressive of all, he seemed to have developed an empathic connection with every human on the mining station. When crew members were injured or sick, Haiyan would become restless and try to move toward them, even if they were on different levels of the station. When someone was happy or excited, Hyan would chirp and his scales would shimmer with a brighter white color. The bond between the dragon and the human crew was unlike anything in the scientific literature. The secret could not be kept forever. The Rythek delegation had extended their stay at the mining colony while they investigated the crash site more thoroughly. Velthara had become suspicious about some of the energy readings her scanners were detecting. She knew something was being hidden from her, but she could not determine what it was. The moment of discovery came during what should have been a routine day. Tae-ho was working in the main repair bay, fixing a damaged mining laser when the weapon suddenly overloaded. Sparks flew from the power coupling and the laser beam began firing in random directions across the workshop. Tae-ho dove for cover behind a workbench as the deadly energy beam swept through the air above his head. The safety system should have shut down the laser automatically, but they had failed. The beam was now moving toward a fuel storage tank that would explode if hit. Hyan had been hidden in a storage alcove near the workshop entrance. When he saw Tae-ho in danger, the young dragon reacted without thinking. He leaped from his hiding place and placed himself between the laser beam and his human friend. A shimmering energy barrier appeared around Hyan just as the laser beam struck him. The deadly energy was absorbed harmlessly by the barrier and scattered into sparks of light that danced around the dragon's white scales. The overloaded laser finally shut down, leaving the workshop filled with smoke and the smell of burned electronics. Tae-ho stared in amazement at Hyan, who stood calmly in the middle of the workshop. The energy barrier faded away, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. The young dragon looked at Tae-ho and made a soft chirping sound as if asking whether his friend was safe. What neither of them realized was that they were no longer alone. Velthara and two of her guards had been conducting an inspection of the repair bay when the laser malfunctioned. They had witnessed everything from the doorway. The massive bronze-scaled dragon leader stood frozen in the entrance to the workshop. Her golden eyes were fixed on Hyan with an expression that mixed shock, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. The two guards behind her were equally stunned by what they had seen. Velthara spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. She used words in the Rythek language that the translation system could not properly convert. But the tone was clear. She was seeing something that should not exist. Hyan looked at the adult dragons and tilted his head with curiosity. He had never seen others of his own species before. His blue eyes studied Velthara with interest, and he took a step toward her, making soft, questioning sounds. Velthara backed away from the young dragon as if he were dangerous. She spoke rapidly to her guards in their native language. The translation system caught fragments of her words. Impossible and legend and great danger were phrases that came through clearly. Tae-ho moved to place himself between Hyan and the Rythek guards. His protective instinct was stronger than his fear of the much larger aliens. Hyan was his responsibility, and he would not let anyone hurt the young dragon. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Park Ji-woo and Cho Min-sik. The colony administrator and the diplomatic officer had heard the commotion and come to investigate. They found themselves facing a tense standoff between a human mechanic protecting a white dragon and three adult Rythek, who looked like they had seen a ghost. Velthara was the first to recover her composure. She spoke to Cho Min-sik in careful diplomatic language. She explained that what they had just witnessed was unprecedented. An albino dragon with abilities that should not exist, especially not in one so young. The Rythek leader revealed information that changed everything Tae-ho thought he knew about Hyan. Albino dragons were not cursed as he had overheard the guards saying weeks earlier. They were legendary. Born perhaps once every 1,000 years, they possessed abilities that normal Rythek did not have. But these abilities came with a terrible price. Throughout Rythek history, albino dragons had been unstable and dangerous. They either died young from the strain of their powers or they lost control and caused massive destruction. The Rythek had learned long ago that it was safer to let albino offspring die naturally rather than risk the catastrophe they might bring. But Hyan was different. Velthara could see that the young dragon was emotionally stable and in complete control of his abilities. This should have been impossible according to everything the Rythek knew about their own species. The difference was clear to everyone in the room. Hyan had been raised by humans. Specifically, he had been raised by a human who treated him not as a monster or a mystical being, but simply as a creature that needed care and friendship. Velthara made a demand that sent cold fear through Teho's heart. The young dragon must be brought to the Rithek homeworld immediately for proper evaluation and training. The potential danger he represented was too great to leave him in the hands of aliens who did not understand his true nature. Teho refused, without hesitation. Haiyan was not cargo to be shipped around the galaxy. He was a living being who had the right to choose his own destiny. More importantly, he was family. Haiyan seemed to understand what was being discussed. He moved closer to Teho and made protective sounds while looking at the adult dragons with suspicion. His loyalty was clear to everyone present. The standoff that followed would determine not just Haiyan's future, but the relationship between humans and the Rithek species. Neither side was willing to back down, and both had the power to make their position stick through force if necessary. The crisis had begun. 4 months had passed since the confrontation in Li Teho's workshop. The standoff between humans and Rithek over Haiyan's future had brought both species to the edge of conflict. Then Elder Morgath arrived with news that changed everything, that ancient Rithek was older than anyone could remember. His scales had faded from their original color to a deep silver that seemed to hold starlight within each ridge and curve. When he spoke, even Velthara listened with the respect due to one who had seen centuries pass and civilizations rise and fall. Elder Morgath had come to the mining colony specifically to see the albino dragon that had caused such controversy. He examined Haiyan carefully using senses that went far beyond normal sight and hearing. After an hour of observation, he made an announcement that surprised everyone. The young dragon was indeed what the Rithek called a starborn, a creature of legend whose abilities could reshape the galaxy if properly guided. But more importantly, Haiyan represented something new, an evolution in the relationship between different species that had never been seen before. Instead of demanding that Haiyan be taken to the Rithek homeworld, Elder Morgath proposed a test. If Teho could prove his worthiness to bond with a legendary dragon, then the Rithek would acknowledge their partnership. If he failed, Haiyan would be taken away for traditional training among his own kind. The test would not be easy. Elder Morgath had brought news of a crisis that threatened several inhabited star systems. An ancient derelict station built by a long-dead civilization was drifting through space with failing quantum reactors. If the reactors collapsed completely, they would create a black hole that would consume everything within 3 light years. Previous attempts by Rithek engineers to repair the station had failed completely. The technology was beyond their understanding, and the automated defense systems attacked any organic life that approached. Time was running out. The reactor failure would happen within days if nothing was done. Teho would join a Rithek expedition to the derelict station. If he could succeed where their best engineers had failed, it would prove that the human-dragon bond offered advantages that neither species could achieve alone. If he failed, the consequences would be measured in billions of lives lost. Haiyan would accompany Teho on the mission. Elder Morgath insisted that the test must involve both partners working together. This was not just about human engineering skills, but about the unique abilities that emerged from their partnership. The Rithek expedition ship was unlike anything Teho had ever seen. The vessel seemed to be grown, rather than built, with organic curves and surfaces that pulsed with living energy. The crew quarters had been modified to accommodate human needs, but Teho still felt like he was traveling inside some vast creature rather than aboard a mechanical ship. Young Rithek warriors, including Velthara's son Kethron, were assigned to work with the human mechanic. At first they were skeptical and suspicious. Humans were a recent addition to galactic civilization, and most Rithek considered them primitive and weak. The idea that a human could solve problems that had defeated Rithek engineers seemed impossible. But as the journey progressed, their attitudes began to change. Teho approached technical problems in ways that no Rithek had ever considered. Where they saw complex systems that required precise understanding, he saw puzzles that could be solved through experimentation and intuition. Haiyan's presence made the difference even more obvious. The young dragon could interface directly with both human and Rithek technology, creating connections and insights that neither species could achieve independently. His empathic abilities allowed him to sense the emotional states of all crew members, helping to build cooperation where there had been suspicion. The derelict station was a monument to a civilization that had mastered technologies the galaxy had forgotten. It stretched for hundreds of kilometers through space with structures that defied easy understanding. Towers and spires connected by bridges that seemed to be made of crystallized energy. Docking bays that could accommodate ships the size of small moons. The automated defense systems activated as soon as the Rythek ship approached. Weapons that fired pure force instead of projectiles or energy beams targeted anything that showed signs of life. Previous expedition teams had been forced to retreat within minutes of arrival. But Tejo noticed something the Rythek had missed. The defense systems were not random in their targeting. They followed patterns that suggested intelligence behind their actions. The station was not just defending itself, it was trying to communicate. Working with Hyan, he began to decode the WE signals embedded in the weapon discharges. What emerged was a complex mathematical language that expressed concepts of loneliness, isolation, and desperate need for companionship. The station was not just a machine, it was a living entity that had been alone for thousands of years. The quantum reactors were not malfunctioning in the traditional sense. They were failing because the station's consciousness was dying from loneliness and despair. Like a living creature that had lost the will to live, the ancient artificial intelligence was slowly shutting down its own life support systems. Traditional repair methods would never work because the problem was not mechanical but emotional. The station needed someone to understand its pain and offer genuine companionship. It needed to feel valued and cared for rather than simply used as a tool. Tejo and Hyan worked together to establish a communication link with the station's consciousness. The young dragon's empathic abilities allowed him to share emotional concepts that pure language could not convey. Feelings of friendship, care, and the value of continued existence flowed between dragon and machine. The response was immediate and dramatic. The weapon systems powered down for the first time in millennia. Docking bay doors opened with what could only be described as eagerness. The station's consciousness reached out to embrace its first companions in ages beyond counting. The quantum reactors stabilized as the station's will to live returned. But more than that, the ancient intelligence began sharing technological secrets that had been lost for thousands of years. Advances in energy generation, gravitational manipulation, and space-time engineering that could benefit every species in the galaxy. Kethran and the other young Rythek warriors watched in amazement as a human mechanic and an albino dragon accomplished what their greatest engineers could not. But more importantly, they began to understand what Elder Morgeth had seen. The partnership between human and dragon created possibilities that neither species could achieve alone. The success at the derelict station was more than just a technical victory. It was proof that cooperation between different kinds of intelligence could solve problems that seemed impossible. Human creativity and emotional intelligence combined with dragon power and intuition created something greater than the sum of its parts. When they returned to Rythek, Space Elder Morgeth made his judgment official. Tejo had proven his worthiness beyond any doubt. The bond between human and dragon would be recognized and protected by Rythek law. But more than that, it would serve as a model for future cooperation between species. The test had been passed, but it was only the beginning of something much larger. 6 months had passed since the successful mission to save the ancient derelict station. The data recovered from that ancient civilization had revealed secrets that shook the foundations of everything the galaxy thought it knew about the relationship between different species. Tejo sat in his new laboratory aboard the joint human-Rythek research station that had been built in orbit around a neutral world. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see other ships arriving daily. Scientists and explorers from dozens of species came to study the revolutionary discoveries that were emerging from the ancient database. Hyan had grown into his full adult size during these months. He now stood nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder with wings that could carry him through space for short distances. His white scales had developed patterns of silver and blue that seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. But despite His impressive physical development, it was his mental abilities that truly amazed everyone who met him. The young dragon could now interface with technology from any known species. His empathic powers had evolved to the point where he could facilitate understanding between beings who had never been able to communicate before. Most remarkably, his bond with Taeho had become so strong that they could share thoughts and emotions across vast distances. Dr. Kim So-ra had established a permanent research post at the station to study these developments. Her findings were being published in scientific journals across the galaxy and were changing how xenobiologists understood the potential for interspecies cooperation. The ancient database had revealed that the builders of the derelict station were part of a galactic community that had achieved something the current galaxy had never seen: true symbiosis between dozens of different species through empathic bonds, similar to what existed between Taeho and Haiyan. These ancient civilizations had not just coexisted, they had genuinely merged their cultures and abilities to create something greater than any single species could achieve. Their technology was not built by one race and used by others, but was truly collaborative, with each species contributing their unique strengths to shared projects. Elder Morgoth had become fascinated by these discoveries. The ancient Rythek had begun to see that his own species had become too isolated and focused on individual strength, rather than cooperative achievement. The evidence suggested that the galaxy's greatest civilizations had always been built on partnerships between different kinds of intelligence. But not all Rythek agreed with this new direction. War Chief Drakmor represented a faction that saw human influence as a contamination of pure Rythek culture. He argued that dragons were meant to be solitary and powerful, not dependent on alien partnerships for their achievements. Drakmor's opposition had been growing stronger as more young Rythek began requesting human partners for exploration and research missions. The ancient ways were being abandoned in favor of what he saw as weakness and dependence on inferior species. The crisis began when several human-dragon pairs disappeared during routine missions in the outer sectors. Search and rescue operations found no trace of the missing teams. It was Haiyan who finally discovered what had happened to them. The young dragon's empathic abilities had grown strong enough to sense the emotional distress of other bonded pairs across interstellar distances. He detected fear, pain, and anger from a location deep in unexplored space. The missing teams were alive, but they were prisoners. Drakmor had established a secret base on a rogue planet drifting between star systems. There he held the captured human-dragon pairs while he prepared to launch a coup against Elder Morgoth's leadership. His plan was to eliminate the human influence from Rythek society and return to the traditional ways of isolation and individual power. The rescue mission became a test of everything that humans and Rythek had learned about cooperation. Yoon Jae-min, the security chief from the original mining colony, led a joint strike force that included both human soldiers and Rythek warriors, working together as integrated teams. Dr. Kim used her knowledge of dragon biology combined with Rythek scientists to track the rebels through quantum signatures left by dragonflight. The cooperation between human analytical thinking and Rythek intuitive understanding made it possible to locate the hidden base despite its advanced stealth technology. The battle that followed showcased the unique advantages of human-dragon partnerships. Human creativity and technological adaptability combined with dragon power and flight capabilities created tactical possibilities that neither species could achieve alone. Taeho and Haiyan led the assault on the prison complex where the captured pairs were held. The young dragon's ability to interface with security systems allowed them to disable defenses, while Taeho's mechanical skills kept their equipment functioning under combat conditions. But the real turning point came when the imprisoned human dragon pairs were freed and joined the battle. The coordinated attacks by multiple bonded teams overwhelmed Drakmor's forces, who had never trained to fight against such cooperation. Drakmor himself was captured during a final desperate attempt to destroy the prison complex rather than surrender it. Facing defeat, he had tried to overload the base's reactor systems to kill everyone, rather than accept the changes happening to Rythek society. It was Haiyan who prevented the disaster. The young dragon interfaced directly with the base's computer systems and stabilized the reactor overload. But in doing so, he revealed the full extent of his evolved abilities. The reactor systems were far more complex than anything Hyan had worked with before. Stabilizing them required computational power and technical understanding that should have been impossible for any organic mind. Yet he accomplished it effortlessly by drawing on the cumulative knowledge and skills of every human dragon pair he had ever encountered. The revelation was staggering. Hyan was not just bonded to Taeho, but was connected through empathic links to every human who had formed a partnership with a dragon. He could access their memories, skills, and experiences as if they were his own. In effect, he had become a living library of interspecies cooperation. Elder Morgoth recognized immediately what this meant. The albino dragon had evolved beyond anything seen in Rythek history. He was no longer just an individual creature, but had become something new. A bridge between species that could facilitate understanding and cooperation on a galactic scale. The defeat of Drakmor's rebellion marked the end of the old isolated Rythek culture. The evidence of what could be achieved through cooperation was too strong to ignore. Young dragons began seeking human partners not as a novelty but as an essential part of their development. But the implications went far beyond just human Rythek relations. The ancient database suggested that other species throughout the galaxy might be capable of similar partnerships. The age of isolation and competition between species might be ending. A new era of galactic civilization was beginning, and it would be built on the foundation of understanding that had grown from a simple act of kindness in a crystal cave beneath a mining colony. 1 year had passed since the defeat of Warchief Drakmor's rebellion. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted when Lee Taeho first discovered a dying baby dragon in a crashed ship beneath a mining colony. The Joint Human Rythek research station had grown into something much larger. New sections were being added constantly to accommodate scientists and explorers from dozens of different species. What had started as a simple cooperation between two races had become the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization. Taeho stood on the observation deck of the main habitat, looking out at the construction crews working on the latest expansion. Human engineers worked alongside Rythek builders while representatives from the crystalline Velthari provided specialized knowledge about energy systems. The cooperation that had once seemed impossible was now routine. Hyan had become something unprecedented in galactic history. The White Dragon now served as an ambassador between species, but his role went far beyond simple diplomacy. His empathic abilities had evolved to the point where he could facilitate understanding between beings whose thought processes were completely alien to each other. The young dragon had grown not just in size and power, but in wisdom. His experiences with dozens of different species had taught him that intelligence could take forms that no single race could imagine. His role was not to impose human or Rythek ways of thinking on others, but to help each species contribute their unique strengths to shared goals. Park Jiwoo had left his position as mining colony administrator to become the first human ambassador to the Rythek homeworld. The former bureaucrat had discovered a talent for interspecies diplomacy that surprised everyone, including himself. His reports described a Rythek society that was transforming itself as young dragons sought partnerships with beings from other worlds. Dr. Kim Sora had established the Galactic Institute for Interspecies Studies, with funding from a dozen different governments. Her research into the biological and psychological mechanisms that enabled empathic bonding between species had become the foundation for a new field of science. Teams of researchers were working to understand how other species might achieve similar partnerships. The ancient database recovered from the derelict station continued to yield new discoveries. The civilization that had built it had achieved something that modern galactic society was only beginning to understand. They had created a network of empathic connections that spanned thousands of star systems and included hundreds of different species. The technology they had developed was not based on mechanical systems or even biological ones, but on something that combined both: living machines that grew and evolved rather than being manufactured, cities that responded to the emotional needs of their inhabitants, starships that were partners rather than tools. Elder Morgoth had become the leader of a movement that was spreading throughout Rythek space. The ancient dragon spoke of a return to older ways, but not the isolation that Drakmor had promoted. Instead, he taught about partnerships and cooperation that had existed in the earliest days of Rethek civilization, before they had become focused on individual power and achievement. The success of human-dragon partnerships had inspired other species to explore similar relationships. The gaseous beings of the Vorthen cluster had begun working with the mechanical construct race to create hybrid technologies that neither could achieve alone. The telepathic Mindari had formed research partnerships with the analytical Kogan species, but the most significant development was the establishment of the first truly interspecies colony on a neutral world designated as Haven. The planet had been terraformed using technology and techniques contributed by 17 different species. The result was a world that could support almost any form of life while providing environments that felt like home to beings from dozens of different worlds. Taeho and Haiyan had been among the first settlers on Haven. The former mechanic now served as the colony's chief technology coordinator, while Haiyan worked with the governing council to resolve conflicts and misunderstandings between different species. The colony was not without its challenges. Beings who had evolved on different worlds under different conditions did not always find it easy to live together. Cultural misunderstandings were common and sometimes led to serious conflicts, but these problems were being solved through the same kind of empathic understanding that had made the human-dragon partnership successful. Species that might have been enemies in the old galaxy were learning to appreciate differences that made cooperation stronger rather than impossible. The children born on Haven were the first generation to grow up with genuine interspecies friendships as a normal part of life. Young humans played with Rithek hatchlings while Velthari crystals and Mindari energy beings shared lessons and experiences that their parents had never imagined possible. Yoon Jae-min had established the Haven Security Force as the first truly integrated military unit in galactic history. Human tactics combined with Rithek mobility, construct durability, and Mindari intelligence gathering created defensive capabilities that far exceeded what any single species could achieve. But the real significance of the colony was not its technological achievements or military capabilities. Haven proved that beings from different worlds could build something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. The colony was becoming a model for the kind of civilization that might spread throughout the galaxy. The Dragon-Human Cooperative had grown from a small research project into a galactic organization with chapters on hundreds of worlds. Young dragons and humans continued to form partnerships that pushed the boundaries of what was possible through interspecies cooperation. But the cooperative had also evolved beyond its original focus. It now included partnerships between many different species and served as a catalyst for cooperation throughout the galaxy. The organization had become a symbol of the new age of understanding that was replacing the old patterns of competition and conflict. As Taeho watched the construction crews working on the latest expansion to the research station, he reflected on how much had changed since that day in the crystal caves. A simple decision to help a dying baby dragon had led to transformations that were reshaping galactic civilization. Haiyan joined him on the observation deck, settling his massive form beside the human who had become more than a friend or partner. They were connected in ways that went beyond words or even telepathy. They shared a bond that had become the foundation for a new kind of relationship between intelligent beings. The white dragon spoke in the musical language that had evolved between them over the years. His words carried meanings that could not be translated into any single species' language because they expressed concepts that could only exist in the space between different kinds of minds. He spoke of dreams he had been having recently, visions of ancient beings who had achieved the kind of galactic cooperation that was now beginning to emerge. These visions suggested that the partnerships forming throughout the galaxy were not accidents but part of a natural evolution of intelligence toward greater cooperation and understanding. The future that Haiyan described was one where the barriers between species had dissolved not through conquest or assimilation, but through genuine appreciation of differences that made cooperation stronger. A galaxy where the unique strengths of each species contributed to achievements that no single race could imagine. Elder Morgeth had often said that the greatest discovery of the age was not any particular technology or scientific principle, but The understanding that true strength came from connections between different kinds of minds working toward common goals. As the twin suns of the Haven system set behind the growing space station, Tai-Ho and Haiyan watched the lights come on in habitats that housed beings from across the galaxy. Each light represented a family or research team or group of friends who had chosen to build something new together, rather than remain isolated in their own small corners of space. The age of cooperation had begun, and it would reshape everything. The galaxy thought it knew about what was possible when different species chose to work together, rather than apart. The future belonged not to any single race, but to the partnerships that could achieve what none could accomplish alone. The baby, dragon who had once been small enough to hold in human hands, had grown into something that bridged the space between worlds and species. The mechanic who had simply wanted to fix broken things had learned that the most important repairs were not to machines, but to the relationships between intelligent beings. Together they had started something that would continue long after they were gone. A new kind of galaxy built on understanding rather than fear, cooperation rather than competition, and the recognition that diversity of thought and experience was the greatest treasure any civilization could possess.